I'm Dr. Beth Molleson.
And I'm Dr. Alyssa Watson.
Thank you all for joining us here in the Veterinary Breakroom, where we have short conversations and chat informally about relevant topics in veterinary medicine. And today's topic was inspired by some recent events, and we are going to talk about what we term duty of care. So we'll get into this in a little more detail, but basically talking about the idea of where the responsibility lies for veterinarians to provide care or emergency care specifically to pets in their community or pets. And certainly we could go beyond pets too, but for this conversation, we'll focus on pets to provide that sort of emergency care for patients that they have a VCPR with. So what made us want to talk about this is we've seen a few things running around social media recently. I think the most recent was about a group of people in the Mid-Ohio Valley whose dog died in August. And they say that it was a direct result of their pet not having any weekend vet care because there were no vets open in their community on the weekends. And that has inspired them to kind of try to make official change, legal change about what veterinarians are expected to do for pets in the community. So it's all very interesting. And I know we've also seen, some of you may have seen this, it was an email that went out from the Alabama State Board of Veterinary Medical Examiners, basically reminding vets that they have an obligation to provide emergency services, whether that's directly or indirectly, for their patients with the VCPR, so that veterinary client-patient relationship. And Alyssa and I were just talking about this, but it's kind of interesting because what they did is they kind of copy and pasted some phrasing from their state's veterinary act, their state's practice act, so the Veterinary Practice Act, that kind of highlighted what was already in that practice act, some phrasing that made it more clear. They kind of emphasized that more was needing to be done. They did use some interesting language kind of about how there are plenty of veterinarians that have the Alabama veterinary license, but for some reason, and I think that was their actual verbiage, for some reason, the number of licensed veterinarians did not match the number of practicing veterinarians. So it wound up being a somewhat inflammatory email. And Alyssa, I know you were looking into this more, and I think you found something. Will you tell us about what you found from Arkansas?
Sure. Yeah. So I was definitely looking into it a little bit more after I read through the letter. And, the Alabama State Board letter was posted in multiple places online. So even though I don't, nor have I ever practiced in Alabama, I was able to easily find it and read it. But there was also some talk on a Facebook page about how Arkansas had brought a bill to its state legislature earlier this year, earlier in 2023. And that bill was actually going to be referred to as the Animal Emergency Veterinary Treatment Act. And it really quite reminded me of like the Human Medical, like EMTALA Act, where emergency departments have to provide care to people in an emergency situation, regardless of their ability to even pay. And so that's where I think that this particular act and this bill was not even brought to the floor, as far as I can tell. In Arkansas, it was withdrawn by the legislator that had proposed it. The author of this bill had actually taken it back, and I'm sure that there was, probably involvement from local veterinary groups in order to, get this legislation, taken off the docket or tabled or whatever legal term is used for that. I'm definitely a veterinarian, not a politician, nor a legal scholar. So, but I will tell you, I did find a copy of the original bill, and I'll just read you this part of it because I found it quite alarming. And it's part of this, Emergency Treatment Act said that if an animal is brought to a veterinary practice or veterinarian and a request is made on behalf of the animal for examination or treatment, the veterinary practice or veterinarian shall provide an appropriate medical screening exam, And then it goes on a little bit more, but the part that really got me was a veterinary practice or veterinarian shall not delay an appropriate medical screening exam under subsection C or further medical examination or treatment of this section in order to inquire about the ability of the animal's representative to pay or the insurance status of the animal. So I thought that was really, I mean, they actually put into this bill that you could not, that you had to provide emergency medical care and stabilization without first, inquiring who was going to pay or whether there was somebody available, a representative of the owner or something to see, if someone was going to be able to pay for these services. And from what I understand from different practice acts, that can really be difficult because many veterinary practice acts say that once you create a VCPR, once you examine an animal and, give a preliminary diagnosis and treatment plan, that's what establishes your duty to then treat. And so this definitely makes a lot of that much more murky as to when is that VCPR established and who is going to be responsible for paying for that animal. So I don't know. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I was going to say keyword to me feels to be murky. Like it's so hard for those of us that are not legal scholars, like you said, Alyssa, to try to make sense of this and to try to understand what some of these terms mean for us on a day-to-day basis. I think that's a huge challenge of it. But, going back to that, I do think this is a nuanced topic even before we bring up the idea of the cost of these services. I mean, that of course makes it that much more complex. But even just, the idea of having the resources to provide these services from the veterinary side of it, I think, is such a loaded issue. And, I think that's not to say too, I kind of understand where this is coming from. It's a really depressing idea to think about the fact that we just don't have enough care for, again, we'll keep it pet focused, but we just don't have enough care for our pets right now. And that varies by community, of course. Maybe it's okay in many areas, but in rural areas there's maybe not the same level of access to care, and certainly at 2 a.m. you don't have the same access of care, and that there really might be situations where there's no one there to help a pet. So to me, most of what I read on this topic was incredibly frustrating and raised a lot of strong emotions, but I don't want that to make it seem like I don't have a ton of compassion for the fact that, we have these pets and of course pet owners that just don't have easy access to care. But of course, the reality of the situation is, again, that we just don't have, going back to this email from Alabama, it kind of insinuated that if there was an emergency, say normally you recommend that your that your clients take their pet to an emergency practice, but maybe that practice is now closed overnight because they don't have enough staff. It was suggested that you should then be the one providing care. And it's just so easy to say that on paper. And then you think of the reality of the situation. And of course, you have the veterinarian's quality of life, the access to staff, the access even to, for corporate practices that are inside pet stores, the access to the practice itself. And the other topic this raises to me is, it seemed to be a theme throughout a lot of what I was reading, is there's this idea that, like, if you quote, take your pet to the vet, that you will walk out the door like fine. I don't know. That's a phrase that's always bothered me, where I feel like, just because a general practice is open doesn't mean they have the resources needed to treat the skill level, the resources to treat an emergency. And sure, maybe it's better than nothing. But I also, as I was reading this, really got frustrated by the idea of, like, we should just be able to fix anything anytime with any amount of resources. And I feel like that's a mountain that vets have always had to climb. But now in this
Mhm.
climate of pet owners expecting higher levels of care, we're suddenly just again expected at 2 a.m. with zero resources to have the skill level of a board certified neurologist. Like I just feel like there's that error of all these assumptions that are being made about what we can and should be able to do that's just so far outside the realm of reality. And again, going back to that phrasing from the email of like, for some reason, there's not as many practicing vets. It's like, we could maybe give you a few reasons. No one's going to want to sign up and have a VCPR with a client if it means that you suddenly are on call 24/7. So,
Mhm.
the fact that we're kind of leading with that mentality rather than leading with the idea of like, hey vets, what can we do to support you? Maybe that would be the place to start. And obviously it's such a complex issue, but again, just a lot of frustration to me comes out of reading some of this.
Yeah. And I think that there is a really large, communication gap between, people and the general public. And we've talked about this before. This is nothing new about the costs that it takes to run a veterinary clinic,
Hmm.
especially an emergency hospital. And I see that even within the veterinary field. I will see definitely some conversations between general practitioners and ER vets, or day practices and overnight care practices about the difference in cost of care. And even within the veterinary profession, people arguing or talking about the fact that ER care, overnight care is getting cost prohibitive for people, for the general public. And then having veterinarians come out and defend their, or feeling like they need to defend their pricing, and go through, well, this is what it costs to keep the doors open.
Hmm.
And that is the place where, going back to that group, like you said, there was the case in Ohio where the gentleman's dog passed away, and I don't know any much about the case. I didn't really look into it, what happened with the dog, but he definitely blamed his dog's death on the fact that, yeah, there were no emergency veterinarians to take the dog to, within what he considered a reasonable distance. And that's another thing. What is a reasonable distance? Is
Hmm.
it a half an hour? Is it 2 hours? If you're in a rural community, is it 5 hours that you would have to drive to get to an ER? I don't know. I don't know what the right answer is. But that group, he formed a community group, and he has been in touch with local legislature, and trying to further this idea that if there are veterinarians in his local community, that it's really their obligation to come together and come up with a solution that involves some type of rotating call to be available to the community. I mean, that's basically what he wants. He wants the local veterinarians to come together, come up with some rotating call schedule so that somebody is available for him all of the time. And I just don't think that they have really any idea what they're actually asking,
Hmm.
or the cost of what that would be.
Hmm.
Because I definitely worked where I was on call in the middle of the night, and it was just me, and I didn't have a technician, and and there's not a lot that I could do in that situation. And I felt that I'm a good veterinarian. I had my patient's best interests at heart. And in that situation, I mean, I'm not going to be taking x-rays by myself in the middle at 2 a.m. Who's going to
Right.
hold the pet? Who's going to do these things? So there's a lot of emergency situations where a single practitioner in the middle of the night isn't equipped to help you anyway.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And to the cost it would take to one, hire a vet that's willing to sacrifice their quality of life to have that level of on call, pay your technicians, then suddenly obviously that cost of care has to be passed along. Then suddenly we're pricing out maybe other pet owners who can no longer afford care for their pet. And to me, there's ethical issues that come along with that. So what to some people seems like, oh, here's the issue. We've got issue A, we've obviously got solution B. Yeah, like you said, it's just a communication issue where this is such a nuanced problem, that can be frustrating, especially when people that aren't associated with the veterinary industry try to come up with a solution. But it's all very interesting. I do encourage people to look into their states, kind of maybe their different states rules and things like that. I was looking at Ohio's, and I did read the VCPR. I was just kind of interested by that. I should probably have known what the definition of that was, but there was an added addendum there that I didn't realize. It said part of that definition was that you need to be available for follow-up or arrange for emergency coverage in the event of an adverse reaction or treatment failure. So it really did, there was maybe some depth there that I wasn't aware of, that, once you have that relationship in one way or another, again, directly or indirectly, meaning there needs to be, emergency staff available to field those issues, those treatment failures or treatment reactions, in the absence of me being there. It's interesting, and it honestly feels kind of daunting to read some of those issues on the Practice Act. Is just very interesting.
Yeah, definitely just a reminder to get yourself refreshed on that. They do change. Your practice, acts do change. There are some resources out there. I know AVMA has a kind of summary table of the main points of the different practice acts, especially when it comes to, the VCPRs. And their regulations. I think it's a little older now, but we'll link it down below for people. And just make sure that, you're aware of what's going on. And I'll tell you, I see a lot of complaints about, the AVMA, or sometimes, your local veterinary medical associations. But I do think that it's important to have those people out there watching for these, different laws that could be coming in front of your state legislatures that you might not even be aware of, and having those people around to monitor for that and to lobby on our behalf, so that we don't end up being, regulated into something that is going to, cause even more problems in the profession when we're already dealing with such high levels of stress and burnout and burden. So
yeah, that's a good call out. There are people out there looking out for the well-being of veterinarians. It's not just the doom and gloom that I feel like I focused on here. But anyway, Alyssa, let's continue to lighten it up with the win of the week, if you have one.
Yeah, I actually do have a win of the week, and it's clinical this week. So I had a patient come in, and it was the first time that I had ever seen this patient. And I had a very long appointment. It ended up being 45-minute long appointment. And the owner was so nice. But he had brought this dog in, and the dog had some significant weight loss and had quite a bit of testing. And there was some miscommunication. He had thought that the dog was diagnosed with EPI, but he had been treating the dog had been on Tylosin powder, and that had been controlling its diarrhea fairly well. But obviously there was quite a bit of a little bit of communication breakdown there, and so we sat down and went through all of his testing and everything again, and I had noticed that the dog had never had a resting cortisol level. And the latest bout of illness and diarrhea was after the dog had come in for, just some routine vaccinations and things like that. And so I kind of reached into the back of my brain for that atypical Addison's diagnosis, and we talked a lot about it, and ended up running an ACTH stim test on the dog, and it came back diagnostic for Addison's, and so I felt like a rock star.
That is awesome. I was going to say, there's nothing better than an Addison diagnosis, much less an atypical Addisonian diagnosis. So that's awesome. How's the dog doing, or was this too recent?
Actually, so it's been a couple weeks now, and
Mm-hmm.
to my knowledge, I haven't been back at that practice, but I
Mm-hmm.
am in touch with, a lot of the regular veterinarians over there. And so to my knowledge, the dog is doing really well with a little bit of pred.
Good.
So
I'm
fantastic.
sure he appreciates the pred. That is great. I like that win. And my win this week, Alyssa, is not clinical, but it is vet related. And that is that I saw on 3 different occasions last week, I saw 3 different of my vet school classmates, which I absolutely loved my vet school class. I know many people have that same sentiment. And on Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, I saw 3 different of my old pals. So one who lives in town, who travels a lot and I don't get to see, another one who I do get to see pretty often, but we got to go out, just the 2 of us. And then on Sunday, I'm getting my days confused, Friday, I had a friend that was in from out of town. So my gracious husband took care of the kids for 3 days in a row, which is a win in and of itself, but then also got to catch up with all of those people. So it was a nice vet reunion weekend for me.
I love that win. I am counting the days until November because I have my 20-year
Yes.
reunion in November, and so I'm looking forward to seeing everybody. I'm not excited about the fact that I've been practicing for 20 years. That makes me feel really old, but very excited to see everyone.
Think of all those pets you've helped. So just focus on the positive. Well, anyway, thank you all for
I appreciate that.
Yes, yes. Thank you all for listening in today, and we will catch you next episode.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of Veterinary Breakroom. If you enjoyed today's episode, you can find us wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts, including a video version on YouTube. While you're there, make sure you subscribe, rate, and review. You can also listen to or watch our podcast episodes on our website at cliniciansbrief.com/podcast, or drop us a line at podcasts@vetmedics.com. Veterinary Breakroom is a Vetmedics production, produced by Alexis, Ussery, and co-hosted by Dr. Alyssa Watson and Dr. Beth Molleson.